every time Aurora paramedics now use a sedative, an independent team is going to review what happened. It's part of a court-ordered settlement following the death of Elijah McClain.
The 23-year-old died after police put him in a carotid hold and paramedics gave him the sedative ketamine. Now Aurora Fire wants to add an alternative to that drug. 9 News reporter Kelly Rinke explains.
Under a legal agreement, an independent team is making sure Aurora Fire follows certain protocols after the death of Elijah McClain. That same group will review every time paramedics administer a new sedative.
We know that they have learned the lesson of that and have adjusted protocols to make sure that, in fact, dosaging is correct with Versed and with droperidol as well.
Jeff Schlanger is leading that team. He says Aurora Fire told them they were interested in adding the sedative droperidol. Jeff got an opinion from an expert who gave the department the green light.
From everything that I have heard, the sedative is safe.
Aurora Fire stopped using the sedative ketamine after Elijah McClain died. A grand jury indictment says paramedics overestimated the 23-year-old's weight and gave him a dose of ketamine appropriate for someone 77 pounds heavier than him. It's why Aurora Councilwoman Danielle Durinsky questioned why the department would add a new sedative now.
Because I would like to see all of our firefighters and all of our police officers go home at night, every night. And until we know the outcome of the Elijah McClain trials, I don't know why we're talking about injecting anybody with anything. Just my 2 cents.
During a public safety committee meeting, the medical director for AFR said droperidol is widely used across the state. He believes the sedative will allow paramedics to calm someone down during a medical emergency.
As someone has heavy alcohol intoxication or the head injury patients, those patients do better based on the best evidence we have in medicine.
Dr. Eric Hill says they've been reviewing their plan for over a year, including training their paramedics on when to use and not use the drug. So far, the independent group feels comfortable with AFR's plan to add the sedative. Again, this independent group monitors any time Aurora Fire uses a chemical sedative. They say they not only review body camera video from police officers, but all of that documentation from both the police and fire departments, Kim.
Well, it needs to be under extremely close review.
Yeah, and it's not just this, but there are so many other protocols that Aurora Fire and Aurora Police have to follow under that consent decree. And if they decide to roll out this new sedative, again, it's just going to be one of the other things that this group is going to be looking very closely at.
Thank you, Kelly.
A suspected drunk driver accused of crashing into a car full of teenagers in Castle Rock had prior DUIs. Ricky Avalos Trujillo is facing 2 counts of vehicular homicide, vehicular assault, and driving under the influence. State troopers say his car crashed head-on with a car full of teenagers on an I-25 frontage road late Friday. 2 of the teenagers, Colton Bellamy and Audrey Todd, were killed. 2 others were badly hurt. According to an arrest affidavit, Avalos Trujillo had 2 prior DUI convictions. He told officers that night he had only had 1 beer, but he failed multiple sobriety tests.
A firefighter based in Colorado died while fighting a fire out of state. The sheriff's office in Douglas County, Oregon, says that 27-year-old Colin Hagan died after a tree fell on him. Hagan was assigned to a hotshot crew based in Craig. The sheriff's office says he was originally from Michigan.
In the months since the Marshall Fire, we have heard a lot about issues with insurance. New state law kicked in this week that it's intended to help survivors of future fires avoid some of those same roadblocks. The new law requires insurance companies to cover the cost of a family's temporary home for up to 3 years after a fire while they're waiting to rebuild. Many companies require fire survivors to give them a list of every single thing that was in their home in order to get their full benefits. We've heard from people after Colorado's 2020 fires who ended up fighting insurance companies about the age of a container of dog food or the value of a late grandparent's rocking chair. This new law requires companies to automatically pay fire survivors 65% of their contents benefits without a list. The law is not retroactive to past fires, but United Policyholders says survivors of past fires could reference the new law as they negotiate their claims.
Neighbors in Denver's Globeville area are still cleaning up after this weekend's flooding. The floods that filled up part of I-70 also stretched into the neighborhoods, ruining cars and basements.
So we're just used to cleaning up after these storms, cleaning our own basements, cleaning our cellars. And this is not something that we should be used to doing. You know, we should not have that burden of cleaning our basements, our cellars, and cleaning up after stormwater. We live in the city of Denver. There's so many resources. This is just not an extra burden that we should have to deal with.
Neighbors are worried the construction nearby plus sandbags lying around made that flooding worse. Denver Water told us they placed sandbags in the neighborhood but picked them up before Sunday's storm. Meteorologists say that flooding is considered a 100-year flood, meaning there is a 1 in 100 chance of a flood that big happening in any given year. But a researcher with USGS thinks we're underestimating how bad these storms really are. Bob Jarrett says his research shows the most intense part of a storm can be really hard to measure, even with rain gauges and radars.
I think the data is clearly showing that we're underestimating how big these storms are by 40 to 60%. And that's an uncertainty level that I'm certainly very uncomfortable with.
Jarrett says climate change could make this discrepancy even worse. Climate models show our worst storms could get an extra 10 to 25% more rain on top of our underestimated totals.
Former President Trump said late tonight that he wants the search warrant for his home released. The Department of Justice filed a motion earlier today to release that search warrant, along with the list of items that the agents took from Mar-a-Lago. The Washington Post reports that the FBI was looking for classified documents tied to nuclear weapons. They served that search warrant at Trump's home in Florida this week. People familiar with the investigation would not tell the Post whether agents found any of those documents there. Today, Attorney General Merrick Garland said he personally approved the decision to get that search warrant.
The department does not take such a decision lightly. Where possible, it is standard practice to seek less intrusive means as an alternative to a search and to narrowly scope any search that is undertaken.
Tonight, Trump posted on his social media network that he is demanding the release of those documents that he also has copies of and could release himself.
Colorado's 7-day COVID positivity rate is the lowest it's been since May. 7.6% of tests came back positive in the last week. The week before, 9.8% of tests were coming back positive. Worth noting, though, these numbers don't account for home testing. The CDC says it is time to move away from the restrictive COVID measures. The CDC says people no longer need to quarantine after COVID exposure, and you can get closer to strangers again. They're no longer recommending people stay 6 feet apart. In schools, the CDC is removing their test to stay guideline. Students previously exposed to the virus would have to test regularly to stay in class. The agency is citing high vaccination rates and the number of people who have already caught it as a reason for the change. At this point, they're more focused on protecting people from severe illness due to the virus.
It's getting a little easier to buy a house in terms of supply on the market. Still pretty hard to buy a car, though. Interest rates have slowed down car purchases, but there's still not enough inventory. Jennifer Meckles gives us an update on where car buying stands 2 years after pandemic disruptions began.
It's not uncommon for a consumer to go shopping for a new car and not even be able to find one to test drive in a new car showroom, which is very rare.
More than 2 years after the start of the pandemic, we are still waiting on normal to return to the car industry.
We're living through times that we've never expected, never anticipated, never prepared for, never even envisioned.
Tim Jackson is CEO of the Colorado Automobile Dealers Association, and the group's latest auto outlook shows new car sales measured by new registrations dropped 11.3% the first 6 months of this year compared to last, and used car sales fell 7.1%. The first half of this year does look better than the first half of 2020 when the pandemic first started, but go back further and you will see we have not consistently reached pre-pandemic norms.
We can withstand a cooling of consumer demand in the short term because we can't build cars fast enough to fill the orders for a while. We have order banks both from dealers and consumers at higher levels than at any time in history.
Nobody has a crystal ball, but if we are talking predictions,
I would say within the industry, there's a general consensus that we're at least 1.5 to 2 years away from some normalization. And hopefully by 1.5 to 2 years from now, we'll start seeing some normalization, and that will lead to being back to normal within 3 to 4 years.
Jennifer Meckles, 9 News.
President Biden just signed the CHIPS Act, which the administration hopes will increase U.S. production of semiconductors that are used in car manufacturing. Dealerships in Colorado said they're optimistic that will help eventually. They don't expect to see much of a difference for at least a few years. People are getting their Tabor refund checks with unexpected totals. The state insists it's not a mistake.
We're getting a look at plans to dramatically change 2 Denver destinations, a major potential overhaul for the area around Ball Arena, and multi-million-dollar facelift already underway at the beautiful KUSA.
Record heat on the way for us tomorrow, but don't you worry, I have a wonderful cool-off coming your way. How quickly does it arrive and how low do we go? I have all the answers on the other side of this break.